Hello and welcome back to Retail Media Breakfast Club. Listen, the biggest threats to retail media this year aren't external. They're not AI, they're not agentic traffic or disintermediation. They are internal. There are three structural problems that the industry has been avoiding. And here to talk with me about number two, the silo demon, is Anne Hallock, VP of Americas at Mirakl Ads. Welcome back, Anne.
Kiri, I feel like we're going to perform some kind of exorcism. Are we releasing the demons?
I believe that it's not what people ask for, but what the people really need. Well, last week we talked about the demons inside of retail media, not the external threats, but the things that we need to exercise from within retail media. First of all, the growth demon, the expectation of sky high growth year after year. It's coming home to roost. But a lot of the challenges that retail media networks face is internal and alignment there around what is the job of the retail media entity within the company, within the organization. Now we're going to talk about silos. So retail media was built as an ad sales function with a separate team, often siloed off from merchandising and marketing and finance. The structure made sense as a bolt on, but it doesn't make sense now that the retail media infrastructure is often actually the part of the company that is the most modern and the most tech forward. So, this is a really interesting angle, I think, because it's something that you and I and we heard a lot while we were in Miami for Possible and the Drum Commerce Media Forum. Talk a little bit about how retail media infrastructure is often being asked to serve other parts of a retailer's organization.
Kiri, I'm really thrilled by this one. And this is a topic that I think you and I are going to look back on maybe a year from now and be astonished by how much changes in the next 12 months. Genuinely.
Here's hoping.
We were at Possible in Miami a couple of weeks ago. We were at this drum event, Commerce Media Summit. So we were in the room with, it was probably about 60 people, but it was leadership. It was leadership at the brand level. It was leadership at the technology level. And then you had retail media leaders sitting in the room, many of them,
Mm.
some slightly competitive to each other,
Mhm.
whether personally or professionally. And we got to host a couple different roundtables and something started to emerge. And I don't know who we're giving credit for the term mad tech. I certainly did not invent it.
Love
But
it.
someone started talking about the convergence of marketing technology and advertising technology. So they're calling it
Mm.
mad tech, which I find adorable.
Love
And in
it.
fact, Lisa Valentino had given a keynote the first morning of the
Mm.
conference where she talked about how really it sounds as though her purview has expanded quite a bit. And I don't know if that's true or if it was that way all along and we just didn't see those surface areas for the Best Buy Ads business. But one, I think she's just a world class leader. And I find her a very fascinating subject for what she has done to really pull Best Buy Ads forward. There's a lot of, again, different surface areas that they've created that I find very compelling. But two, we were on that group chat together later in the week at Ad Week House, where she was talking about how because of the fact that the ads business has had to keep a very modern tech stack, and thanks to the fact that they are a profit center, they
Yeah.
have been able to fund that sort of next generation bleeding edge type technology. Whereas I
Right.
was in marketing for almost 20 years before I went into tech and sales. And I like to joke that we're really good at spending money. We're not really good at making money,
Mhm.
but it's also a cost center. And so the biggest challenge that
Yep.
you're going to have is that you are potentially using legacy technologies inside of marketing, where that is the piece that's really holding you back from technical excellence, is that there isn't
Mm.
any funding that necessarily. And so what we see is that the retail media arm has created a second flywheel. And that flywheel is how do you leverage customer data meaningfully across your many different touch points, not simply on behalf of your suppliers, but on behalf of your business, on behalf of the retailer. And I am very compelled by it. You and I ended up having that conversation with a couple other retail media leaders who haven't said it publicly, but I think are probably going to soon, where they're being asked to take on more and more in their organization, thanks to the fact that they can fund and really synergize those pieces of technology.
Do you think they're always being asked, or do you think that when someone comes in and they're tasked with, okay, go make money from this thing, and look around at this like totally disheveled sort of state of play, you've got different silos of customer data, you've got different sort of a lot of these businesses have grown through acquisitions, right? And they end up with a lot of legacy tech and departments and sort of looking around like how do we like unify this, and that's been a real journey that a lot of retailers and commerce media networks have had to go on. Do you think that that's really understood internally within these companies, like just how much of a challenge that is? Or like, come on, it's just an ad, just plop an ad on a website, how hard is it?
It's so funny. I could go on so many different tangents, so I'm going to try to stay focused. But I will say one of the reasons why I actually love being on the technology side is that I was on the client side for the first part of my career. And
Mm,
when I was at Clorox, the Marcom team sat on a different floor than the brand team. I mean, we
mm,
were literally physically separated. The media team sat separately from the digital team, and that makes me
yeah.
old, but um and so I think what a lot of people who live inside of tech companies, especially high growth companies that might be a little bit smaller than, say, a Macy's, which is absolutely massive, is that they have this sort of fantasy of like, well, why don't you just go do that? Why don't you just go do this thing? And you have to explain to people that person doesn't even sit in the same building as this other person. And so a lot of it here I actually think has to do with the specialization of talent means that you end up sitting somewhere really specific and getting really good at something really specific. And then when a
Mm.
leader comes in who wants to be transitional and actually wants people to bring those capabilities together, it's really not that simple because you actually have to cultivate that talent alongside the systems that you're being asked to merge. And so again, I mean, I don't mean to just praise Mark this whole time. I'll make sure that I say some cutting remarks later so he doesn't get too
I,
high
he
on
will
himself.
appreciate that.
Yeah, I'll bring him down a notch. Don't worry. But one of the
Right.
reasons why Mark out in the industry talking about what he's talking about is so successful is because he has a pretty diverse background as far as what he's been asked to build over time. And so he
Mm.
happens to be one of those utility player, option quarterback type people who can come in and really understand how to run the ball or pass the ball. And so naturally, he might be someone who that organization is looking at to take on more. Same with Lisa Valentino. She talked about it in this keynote where she just is naturally being looked to take on more because she has, again, just such a breadth and depth of background. So I actually think in some ways, yes, it's technology led, but it's by the people who have the kind of skill set that would allow for that.
So I'm gonna put you in the you've had a lot of hats that you've worn over the years, and I'm gonna put you back in a retail media leader hat. You're trying to break out of this ad sales silo. What's the first move that you make?
Is this a mature retail media organization or are we launching one net new?
Have a mature hat and have a launching hat one.
Curious, I think that's cheating. Okay. Um, if I were walking into a retail media network that already existed, and I have a former colleague, Drew Cashmore, who has incredible intellectual property on this idea of the first wave of retail media networks put their hand out, they got a bunch of money, and then what you see is
Mm.
a sort of plateau in growth. And you look around and you say, well, how are we going to really jumpstart out of this plateau into meaningful growth again? And I think what you would be able to do today that you couldn't have done, I'll say 2 years ago, but maybe even recently as a year ago, is that the technology partners have decided that they're going to be more interoperable. Andrew Lipsman talked about this last summer when Uber made their Instacart announcement. And everyone was like, oh my God. And this is, these are competitors who have partnered
Mm.
to really get this right. This is really fascinating. That I would look at who are the most highly interoperable partners who are showing that they're not going to throttle my demand when I'm generating it, whether that's through direct sales or that's through the digitization of certain capabilities within the organization that haven't sat over in a way that is easy to report on. And I would make sure that with the revenue plans that we're establishing, there's sort of what I would call variability within a cycle. And so if you look at the typical retail revenue in a typical retailer, most of that revenue is recognized in the second half of the year, which is why we see these offset
Mm.
fiscal years, just for example. You can point to, specialty stores that are going to sell
Right.
more in the summer or whatever. But what you want to look at, and again, the reason why I'm a Mirakl Ads and I think Mirakl is such an interesting proposition is that if you have this lumpiness from a revenue standpoint, where you're still having to go do this joint business planning and have this sort of insertion order type shape for your
Mm.
tier one suppliers, how do you just lower that volatility in your revenue plan so that you have something where you know you're funded through the year, but it's coming from torso tail, thanks to the
Yeah.
fact that you've established a tech stack that's going to allow you to operate and activate those advertisers without a high cost to serve.
Boom. Wow, that's a great answer. You're pretty practiced at putting that retail media hat on, I have to say. Well, Anne, this has been great. You know what I'm also really excited about
What's that?
is it's Can. Can is coming up in a few weeks, and you and I are going to be hosting a breakfast together, an IRL breakfast club on the Thursday at Can at Hotel Martinez.
If
Can't
there's
wait.
anything that I love more than Can, it's breakfast at Can. Carrie, I think it's going to be so fun.
So if you're a retail media network leader going to Can, please look out in the show notes. We'll have a link to register for that. And next week, I'm going to see you again and to talk about the shortcut demon, which is our third demon inside of retail media that we're going to be talking about in this series. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next week.
All right, Carrie, we'll get it done.